Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lowcountry Mental Health Conference's Speaker Spotlight Series. We're certainly happy to have you here with us today. My name is David Diana. I'm the director of the Lowcountry Mental Health Conference, and this is the third in our Speaker Spotlight series, which is really designed to just introduce you to some of the fantastic speakers that we have that'll be joining us at the Lowcountry Mental Health Conference, July 28th through 30th this summer, both in Charleston, and we're also offering virtual viewing options as well. Before we get started, I just wanted to recognize some organizations that have made all this possible. Charleston Dorchester Mental Health, which started the Lowcountry Mental Health Conference some 10 years ago. I'd also like to recognize the nonprofit Mental Health Heroes. The conference is a fundraising event for them so that they can continue to do the amazing work they do in our community here in Charleston, South Carolina. So we want to thank them. I would also like to thank our platinum supporter, Palmetto Lowcountry Behavioral Health. We could not have this conference or this series without their support. And we want to thank Mainstream Studios for producing and directing this series for us. It's been incredibly invaluable to us. And I also want to recognize Buxton Books, which is our local Charleston area bookstore that we love, that has been a great supporter of us over the years. We want to thank those folks. I have a number of different questions for our guests today, who I'm really excited to have an opportunity to talk with. But if you would like to ask questions real time, we have two options for you to do so. You could email us at info@mhheroes.com. That's info@mhheroes.com. You could also use the YouTube live chat feature. The only caveat to that is you need a Google account to sign in, which is free. And then you could just post your question there as it comes to you. We have a great team with us that's manning both the emails and the chat feature. And what they will do is they'll send it via text to me, and I'll hopefully do a good job with juggling as we get into this conversation to see if I can get some of those questions to our guests today. This is a really unique and special day for us today. The first two Speaker Spotlight events that we've had have been just interviewing one individual person. We have two today, Dr. Bayo Akómoláfé and Dr. Jürgen Kremer. They're colleagues and friends, and they're calling in here from opposite ends of the globe. Bayo is in Chennai, India, and Jürgen is in Northern California. So we're really happy that they've taken some time out of their day today to speak with us. Let me just give a little bit of an introduction about both of them, and then we'll get going with the conversation. Dr. Bayo Akómoláfé is a psychologist, poet, and philosopher originally from Lagos, Nigeria, and currently living in Chennai, India. He leads an earthwide organization known as the Emergence Network, and he's its chief curator and director. And the organization is set up for the recalibration of our ability to respond to civilizational crises. Bayo received his Ph.D. in clinical psychology from Covenant University in Nigeria. He's a visiting professor at Middlebury College, Vermont, and has taught in universities around the world, including Sonoma State University, Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Schumacher College, Harvard University, Covenant University, and many others. He's a consultant with UNESCO, and he has authored two books, We Will Tell Our Own Story, and These Wilds Beyond Our Fences, Letters to My Daughter on Humanity's Search for Home. And if you go to his website, and we'll send that to you later, he has a number of other different pieces that he's written that are quite interesting to read. Dr. Jürgen Kremer received his doctorate in clinical psychology from the Universitat Hamburg in Germany. And in 1982, he settled in the San Francisco Bay Area to teach full-time and serve as a dean at Saybrook University and at the California Institute of Integral Studies. His teaching and research interests range from general to clinical psychology and research methods, to the relevance of indigenous knowledge for today, as well as ethno-autobiography. And for 4 years, he co-directed with Dr. Apello Colorado, a program for Native American students and authors concerned with indigenous roots and origins. And today, Jürgen is a tenured faculty member at the Santa Rosa Junior College. He is also a consultant to the UN University of Peace and its Indigenous science, and peace studies programs. He's published regularly since 1976 with 150 plus publications to his credit. And he's published a textbook, Psychology and Diversity in Psychology and Integrative Psychology for the 21st Century. His ethno-autobiography is scheduled to be reissued in its third edition with the same publisher, and his multicultural textbook, Abnormal Psychology, has been issued in January of 2020 by Kendall Hunt. So there's many more things that we could say, but I'd rather get into the conversation. I just want to welcome you both. Thanks so much for taking the time and being here today. Excited to have you.
Thank you, David, for inviting us. Thank you.
Yeah,
great to be here.
Oh, great. I'm just going to dive right in here and get into questions because the time will go by fast. The first is, and I think I mentioned this to you both when we were talking about this, but I think it's related more to just what's happening at a global level. Certainly the pandemic being one of the issues, racial equality, climate change, a whole number of different things. But I was asked several months ago, before the vaccines started to come out, from a TV station to go on behalf of Charleston Dorchester Mental Health and talk about how to cope with the COVID pandemic and how to deal with maybe some tips for stress and anxiety around it. And with the short amount of time, and the answer I was able to give was pretty insufficient, very surface level. And I remember after I got through with the interview, I thought of you both, just some of the work that you all were doing. I was like, I wonder what Bayo and Jürgen, how they might answer this if they were asked to come on TV and ask that question. And Bayo, also, in terms of if you can answer this question, there's a great word. I was watching you in a clip that you did of some ancient word named Selah, and I was wondering if you might be able to incorporate that in this issue of diffraction as a way of sort of responding to this question of, how might we cope with this COVID pandemic? And I'm hoping both of you might have some thoughts on that.
Okay. First of all, David, is the texture of your voice is relaxing itself. I don't think you needed to put anything in your answer to that in that context. I don't think you needed to do much content there. Just the voice is a trope of hospitality. Well, Selah is this word, this very strange word that comes from the Bible. I grew up in the Christian south of Nigeria, and I learned about this word. It appears about 76, 77 times in the book of Psalms and some other book. I can't remember. I don't go to church that often these days. But Selah is supposed to be this queer word that signifies a moment in musicology. Ethnomusicologists have been studying it and trying to decipher what it actually means. It was supposed to designate the point at which the band singing for King David or King Solomon, whoever was in charge those days, when the band would breathe, like exhale or pause. There are many interpretations, you see. No one is quite sure. The jury is still out. But it was supposed to be this time when some other interpretations say that the band leader would tell his choir to go on a riff, like a jazz, just do your stuff, break away from the order that I've imposed upon you and just jazz it up a bit. And some others think of it as the point in which you breathe, you put down your horns and your trumpets and stuff, and you just exhale. So I've used that notion of Selah to signify a transversal moment when something so disruptive, so conceptually alien, so ontologically distant penetrates the familiar and disturbs continuity, disturbs the way we frame the world, disturbs our rituals, the rituals that we perform to create the normal and the normative. It's like a giant foot, an alien giant foot in the middle of town or square, and no one knows what to make of it. In a sense, maybe in an epidemiological sense, the virus like a migrant, has disturbed and troubled modern continuity. It's like modern civilization is undone at some level. Like the idea that we could just continue on our way, just keep on progressing, keep on excavating, keep on clearing farmlands, keep on clearing the wilds to create farmlands, keep on displacing people. The idea that we can continue to do that and keep with our blueprints is tested, is troubled. Visibility is low, uncertainty is high. So it seems like we're being called to question the anthropos, what George Gambin called the anthropological machine, is being put in the docks where we're being questioned, we're being accused, so to speak. So how would I respond, in terms of what do we do in these times? I think it's a larger and a more complex questions, is a more complex question than a response like get vaccinated might be enough for. Like there's something else that wants to happen. Uh, this is as much a theological event as it's an epidemiological event. It's not just about getting back to normal. There's something that is lingering that demands our attention, that asks us, what does health mean in these times? It's not just about getting well, but what would wellness mean in the Anthropocene? What could wellness and health mean when my health is now your health? Now we're all tangled together, bodies mangled into each other. What would it mean then in the time of, in such entangling and entangled times, to be well? So the pandemic is for me a Selah event. It's a piercing of the sky, or the insurgency of the invisible, or something else. Fill in the gaps. Something just needs to be met, I think.
Thank you. And Jürgen, any thoughts on sort of this question that I was presented with on the pandemic?
Yeah, building on what Bayo just said, we have this tendency to think there is a problem, and so we need to have a pragmatic technological solution, some form of intervention band-aid. And really, this is a moment, you could call it a moment of initiation, but it's really challenging our courage. Do we have the courage to change our understanding of who we are as humans in the world, how we are part of the world? Do we have the courage to go there and ask these difficult questions and connect them with our daily experience? So band-aids, vaccination obviously is good, but it's hardly sufficient in face of the challenge that we are presented with. There are so many traditions that talk about this. You've probably heard about the end of the Mayan calendar and these kinds of understandings of history. And when I've talked to a Mayan priest, one of the things that he said is, well, it's a time of change. It's a portal, and the outcome is uncertain. And we don't like to think about uncertainty in this way, that the outcome is uncertain, because we like to rely on the certainty of our technological interventions. But to say, really, there is uncertainty, this could go sideways, and we could be in deeper trouble, or it's actually something where we as human beings reconfigure, reconstellate ourselves, reimagine ourselves. That's what we, I think, need to do. So it's an initiatory moment, you could say. And, with any true initiation, you don't know how it's going to turn out. Initiation can fail. And so, because it is a reconfiguring of the self. And are we up for the challenge? And my take on this is that we have everything we know, but do we have the courage and the capacity to actually use it and integrate it? We have so much psychological knowledge, and so much of it does not get used.
Well,
And so
and that's
much does not get integrated into, our daily practices, because it's not just about surviving a pandemic. It's how are we in the world, and is that something we want to continue?
which it's interesting because I'd be interested in terms of how both of you view and define just psychology as a whole. I know Jürgen, you mentioned this idea of local psychologies versus indigenous psychologies, and so I'm kind of interested in that perspective on it.
Well, the first thing I want to say, I understand psychology as a transdisciplinary endeavor, meaning the focus is on the on the psyche, which originally really, the Greek term doesn't just mean mind. It certainly doesn't mean behavior. It means mind and spirit, right? Soul. It's our, it's connecting us to something larger, right? But really, as psychologists, I think if we want to do really good psychology, we need to draw on anthropology, we need to draw on sociology, neuropsychology, et cetera, and all of that feeds in. So that is the first challenge. And we've also, Western psychology has a tradition based, from the history of, the origins of psychology, really, where we've dismissed the psychological knowledge of other traditions that has been there, that was not framed in the way that we frame things in our textbooks today, because it was mostly framed in stories and in rituals. So we've dismissed that. It's unscientific. It's useless. But really, when you go back to the origins of Western psychology, even, there was a larger vision. It wasn't just the psych lab. It was looking at the stories that humans tell, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a larger vision of psychology. And I think we do need to recover this. One of the, when you look at a psychology textbook, why isn't there much about love, for example, or hope, or embodiment, or any of these things that really matter in our daily lives, right? Because a lot of these things that have to do with meaning, and really COVID challenges us to look at, how we make meaning of life, how we make meaning of our existence. But all these textbooks have very little to say about it. So when students get introduced to psychology, they don't hear about it. I gave a lecture yesterday, which was on Jung, and students were excited because it actually allowed them to ask the questions that were burning for them, that have to do with their lives and the meaning of their lives, and how to live their lives, and how to deal with their dreams and the messages that they get in their dreams, and all this stuff that we all have, but standard textbooks have very little to say about this. So I look at, Western psychology has managed to establish itself as the arbiter of what psychology is, which is really unfortunate, because there's so much more to psychology, and we can learn so much from other traditions, say the Abhidhamma in the the Buddhist traditions. I mean, the Buddhists have extremely elaborate maps of consciousness, right? That generally in a psychology class are not taught. Consciousness is finally sort of coming back into a discussion. But that kind of profound knowledge that has been around for hundreds of years is not counted as valid and not included. So Western psychology is a local psychology, as are other, and the important part is the dialogue and the learning from each other. We don't know how to, in the West, we don't know how to really have egalitarian knowledge exchange and really have a genuine dialogue where we don't have epistemological assumptions where we say, well, but we are the ones who are deciding what is true. And we need to get out of that seat and toss it.
Great. And Bayo, any thought in terms of just this defining of psychology and your thoughts on that?
Well, it's the reason Jürgen and I um, came up with a term, interactive psychology, you see, because of our this transdisciplinary quest for um, uh, to defeat or to outwit or to become fugitive, beyond the very Western limited notions of the self. In a sense, I think the self has been displaced. The self as the seat of the human or the liberal humanist subject has been displaced. And so we need to look elsewhere. We need to look beyond the neat boundaries, the isolatable and isolated boundaries that modern um, imperatives force us to engage. We need to look in ecology. So, it's not that some of these things we're saying are new, right? Eco psychology has been playing this game for a long time. Feminist insights have disturbed the boundaries between the self and the other, and the self and the world. So what we want to see more is might coincide with a post-humanist animist notion um, of or transcultural invitation to play with what might be emerging today, that the self is still yet to come. There's something indeterminate about the self. And psychology, in its present iteration, in its present configuration, especially in its fixed university disciplinary modes, cuts out so much that we're left impoverished collectively. And so there is a need for us to travel. There is a need for expeditions beyond these tiny spaces we've occupied for so long.
Fascinating. Bayo, there's both Bayo and Jürgen. I'm interested in knowing what do you mean, Bayo, when you say everything begins in the middle? I read this in your book, these wilds beyond our fences, and it struck me. It also seemed related to a great quote of yours that was, "Falling might very well be flying, but without the tyranny of coordinates." I was wondering if you both can comment on that.
Jürgen, you want to go? Or
Sure. I mean, I didn't write that, and I'll let you comment on that. But I think, when we're talking about whatever COVID or the stress that COVID creates, really it challenges us to have a more profound encounter with who we are, looking in the regions of ourselves that are in process where we might feel like we are falling. Jung's period of when he wrote the Red Book, was a profound process of initiation where he didn't know where it was going to go. Where, you might say in Western terms, his sanity was touch and go, but where he went into these primordial realms, those encounters. But also, and Jung actually always also says that the connection with nature, we have the notion of a static self that we can box, that we can quantify, that we can measure. While, and I call it, that's a dissociated self. We are suffering from the pathology of normative dissociation. We're split off from the sources that uh, feed our process engagement with the world, right? Whether it's with the trees, whether it's with other humans, whether it's with the mountains, whether it's with the weather, whatever it is. We have this static notion, and, including developmentally for the longest time, you develop up to a certain age and then you are who you are, and we stop seeing development. Um, so the plunging, the falling without coordinates is really the confrontation with the primordial, the confrontation with nature, the confrontation with our dreams and paying attention to that. What in our culture usually is dismissed as the irrational, you know. And in Jungian theory, it's about, dreams are the compensatory function. So there's something about when we go into these realms that are not clearly defined, that are messy, where we might get lost, where we might feel overwhelmed, there is something generative in there. And, and that's a part of the connection that Bayo and I have. I think we like to explore these these edges, these shimmering edges, this fuzziness, these interconnections that at times are, are amorphous, that you can't just say, oh, there are 8 of them and let's measure them, right? We like to explore them because, to my mind, that's where the creativity, the imagination for revisioning who we are as humans and what our obligations and responsibilities in the world are, can be renewed from that place. That's where we need to go.
Mhm. Well, I would add that that there's something that a relational ontology or cosmology allows us to to stay with or to find interesting. That when it comes to placemaking, for instance, placemaking is map making. It's how we make home. It's how we render ourselves incapable or how we're rendered capable. So this is another thing in epistemologies and disability studies. It's how bodies are rendered capable, how bodies by the effective force fields that contain them and shape them are the conditions of their becoming, how bodies are made or rendered or reiterated in space time. Um, so that's placemaking. One thing about that is, noticing that we now come to see that, it's not that there is a past that is stable and a future that is stable and a present. The ways that we have come to frame time, for instance, as a past that is done with, we're in the present, and we're striving towards an ever evasive and elusive future. It's a very, very colonial Euro-American framework that is continually tested by ancestral, you know, lingerings and hauntings, and the things that are supposedly done with coming back to haunt us and do things with us that we thought we were done with. Slavery, the Middle Passage, all of that coming back to haunt us. So the past is not yet done with. Origins are not stable or conceptually convenient. We're continually reiterating from the present, which I would call the thick middle, where we come from and where we're going. So it's like we're living in thick time. And this is what my people, the Yoruba people, think of as slushy time. We never thought of the clock or time as this temporal linearity, right? This Comtean, after August Comte, this Comtean arrow that flies through time. We never thought of time in that way. We thought of things instead as messy and mixed. And, every time we look, we're making agential cuts, to use the phrase of Karen Barad. We're cutting through the fabric. We're embroidering something new. So I feel modernity enacts origins and destinations, and then teaches us to think of these things as naturalized, which is the reason why one of the most decolonial or powerful radical acts of freedom or emancipation we can make today is to defamiliarize time or defamiliarize space, and notice that we're doing all of these things that are supposedly just there. The way the world is, we're doing it, we're enacting it, and sometimes in our efforts to outwit it or beat it or defeat it, we only reinforce it. So that's what I mean by, I think, that, how did I put that again, David? That there are only middles, there's no
the thick middle, and
I wrote the book a long time ago, so you please forgive me.
well,
So
the
thick
thing,
middles, yeah.
well, could you explain a little more that's defamiliarizing of time and space? I'm just thinking, so you have someone who's split off in
Yeah.
essence, and so from like a mental health professional perspective, if I'm trying to help this person, or I'm just that individual who's feeling kind of boxed in and is looking to grow, for lack of a better term, I mean, how might one approach that?
I think it's important here I should write that down and frame it on my wall, what James Hillman said about psychology and therapy, having this 100-year span, and we've been doing this for a long time and nothing changes, right? And that was a cautionary tale in, to reinforce the idea that, look, we need to change the way we see the self, the psyche, and all of that. I feel that
Well, and then I'll let you talk, but Jürgen, but I mean, hearing that, it's powerful to me at a visceral level, just coming from a Western perspective, where everything in my mind sometimes is just me or the self, or just whatever is contained in the individual. And so thinking of it in that way is eye-opening. But yeah, Jürgen.
Yeah, and I just want to make a little distinction here. I think what Bayo is saying is extremely important, and and then there's the day-to-day, and at times as clinicians we need to have an immediate intervention to deal with a crisis, but it doesn't take away the obligation to look at these deeper issues, because if we want to facilitate any kind of well-being, health, contentment, balance in our clients, we need to help them to confront these issues, to confront their interconnections, and because look at stress or look at depression, right? we blame or we focus on the person who is sitting in front of us and saying, okay, you know, whatever, let's prescribe Prozac and whatever we might want to do. But really, depression is a social issue. Depression is a much larger issue. And so, you know, maybe there's a temporary, a very limited sort of technical intervention that is necessary in order to get to the deeper conversation. But if there is to be health in the long term, and if that person is going to contribute to balancing the world, the person needs to remember who they are and how they are interconnected with nature, with other human beings. And that is really, you know, that is a shift, which is really, it gives us, you know, it gives us freedom, it gives us sovereignty, it gives us sovereignty of our imagination. And so much in our education, I mean, there's so much here that I would consider a failure in our education that really suffocates imagination, because when we can't live our creativity, when we can't live our imagination, when that is not part of a clinical or a therapeutic process to ignite that, there will not be adequate health. And we're going to continue to fit into some slot that, you know, society has given us, where we maybe superficially happy and managed and function in the day to day, but we're really, you know, a deeper sense of contentment is lacking. And that is, you know, whatever, individuation, initiation into the self. And, you know, Bayo talked about, you know, shamanic healing. You know, shamanic healing is the opening up to these larger realms, these profound encounters. And these encounters are unpredictable, right? We can't be ourselves without taking risks, you know, without having the courage to say, well, that seems to have been an important dream. So let me stick with that dream. Let me be with that dream. Let me interpret it. Let me draw it. Let me make art of it. Let me write about it. Let me be with it. And, you know, that courage, and nothing in our education for the most part, and I'm talking about mainstream education, there are always wonderful exceptions, you know, prepares students to go to these places, because, you know, we devalue the humanities, we devalue anything that can't be quantified in education these days. So we're really educating incomplete human beings, and who, when they are asked to think for themselves, to imagine for themselves, to exercise their sovereignty, have an anxiety attack because they've never experienced that, because they don't know, you know, there's nothing that they can reproduce, that they have memorized, right? Because they're confronted to introspect and go deep into inside and go deep outside, you know? So, you know, earlier in the conversation, Bayo mentioned an important term, which was home, you know, being at home in the world. And in my understanding, all the different traditions, the diversity of the richness of human traditions and cultures really comes out of this interaction between human beings and their ecology and their imagination. Because, you know, at times we have two groups of people in fundamentally the same ecology, but they come up with a different imagination. And that's visionary sovereignty. And we all should be free to do so. So the ultimate goal and value of any psychotherapy is really to empower individuals to go to these places that reconnect them with these processes, and where they go beyond the individual bubble. And the individual bubble is so problematic these days. Jung actually kind of called the spirit of our times psychotic. You know, our rationalism, basically psychotic. But to to go into these spaces there. So that's I think the ultimate commitment of what we as clinicians need to do to help our um, clients to recover that sense of visionary sovereignty, once we engage in the deeper process.
Fascinating. And is in terms of empowering individuals to go beyond that individual bubble, um, is something like the Emergence Network, Bayo, is that connected to that in terms of initiatives to try and bring that about at a larger scale level, or am I missing that in terms of the connection as I'm trying to figure out ways in which people can contribute to that movement towards that path?
Well, larger skills maybe in themselves are thrown out because in times of fluid destruction and when the ground is shaky and there are seismic shifts, it's the measurements with which we tether ourselves and commit ourselves to skills and particular readings become unwieldy. It's just like the movie. Have you watched the movie Interstellar? You
Yeah.
probably had Christopher Nolan. And when they're speeding up and they get to this wormhole, this black hole or something, um, and they try to they get into it and they're going into another aspect of the universe, and the pilot tries to speed up, and then someone else holds his hand and says, you can't speed up here. The meaning of speed is undone, right? In this space, what speed is still yet to come. We haven't figured that the world is teenage in this bubble here, in this wormhole. So you can't just speed up and get to the other side. I think in that sense, especially in a time when a tiny and near infinitesimal critter, a virus, has undone the entire global economy, um, I think our commitments to skill needs to be questioned, right? What does small mean then? And what does large mean? So I think the Emergence Network is about fissures and fault lines and cracks and openings. This is where defamiliarization comes into play. This is where the notion and concept of fugitivity comes into play. That I think that instead of trying to patch things up, which modernity has gotten really good at doing, that is naming the shadows, the darkness, grief as pathological, as evil. It knows how to do that well. Jürgen has written extensively about that. It puts a band-aid on it, and then it enacts this superstructure, this techno-bureaucratic structure to guard the crack and say, don't come here. This place is a crack, and we are protecting you, the good and righteous citizen. So keep walking, just turn around. And I think those are the places we need to infiltrate. This is where the figure of the fugitive running away from the cotton plantation becomes very lively and electrifying for our times. So what we're trying to do, in a sense, is to seek out those places that have been bastardized, those places that have been rendered abject, impoverished, pathological, nonsensical, and to dwell there, using the words of Donna Haraway, to stay with the trouble of that, because we believe or we trust that colonization is never total. I think Foucault said something about this as well, that no matter how strong the boot lands on the neck, there's something that allows for a different site of power to emerge. So we want to occupy those other sites of power, other places of power, because we notice, and this is rendered or articulated in the concept of post-activism, that sometimes in our very efforts to win, to come out on the other side, like the pilot in Interstellar, in our very efforts to pierce through the ribbon and win the trophy to ourselves, we repeat and reinforce and reinscribe the imperatives of the colonizer, or we repeat and reinscribe and reinforce our incarceration. So we need different kind of tools, different concepts, and different ways of thinking, different ways of being. And this is what sitting around a crack figures out for me and people in the Emergence Network. Just a quick story that might help this land. In the Bible, there's this, I don't know why the Bible's coming up. Maybe some of y'all need to get saved. But in the Bible, Jürgen especially, who is on his way to hell, uh, uh, the story of Job, I'm sure you remember the story of Job, suffering and crying. And then he he asks, why me? For anyone who knows that story, Job has suffered, he's lost cattle, he's lost his children. And then he says, I've lived by the book. Why me? Why do all these things to me? And God responds like a drunk psychotherapist, basically throwing to him questions that have nothing to do with the interview, nothing to do with the clinical setting. Basically saying, have you seen Pleiades? Have you seen Leviathan? Have you seen this? Basically praising himself, or, bewildering questions that have nothing to do with this poor man's urgent questions. I've always wondered about that. And I've said to myself, and I've written elsewhere, that maybe something better than an answer to a question is bewilderment, because bewilderment allows us to escape the economy that wraps questions and answers together. It allows us to be confused, which means confusion can be a very gifted resource, a very good resource in times of trouble. It allows us to escape and to travel elsewhere. So I think this is the defamiliarization we're seeking, and we're hoping to build in terms of our programs in Emergence Network, to find other ways of being in the world together, to ritualize grief, not as suffering, not as death, to think of hopelessness as an ally, not as the end of the road or something, or to trouble those surface level, stable notions of sanity that we've adopted as legacy ideas, and to dive deep. The Greeks call it katabasis, to go deep into the soil and re-engineer, in the words of Jürgen, to recalibrate our bodies and selves. That's the kind of work that we're hoping to see happen.
Excellent. Thanks, Bayo. We're getting closer here to the end here, so let me see what other questions I can get in here.
Jürgen, you're not going to hell. Forgive me.
Jürgen. Oh, that was great. Jürgen, you mentioned that I wanted to get to this, the concept of the fallacious self, and I was hoping that you both might have something to say about that within the context of our conversation here.
Well, we've talked about it. We've talked about the fallacious self. Which is really this this corset, this crust that we put on ourselves to create this illusion that the self is closed off from the rest of the world, and that I am in charge, and that I have control, and that whatever might go wrong with the self, there is a technical or technological intervention that might help right the path. And what we've been talking about is really, when we look at it, it's a forgetting, it's a denial, it's a dissociation, it's a splitting off from what we're all enmeshed in. So a lot of what we've been talking about is an act of remembrance of ancestry, where we're coming from, remembrance of our connections with nature, etc., etc. So, and that's very profound. On some level, this may sound like we have this humongous task, and in a sense, it is a humongous task. But also, each of us, each single person, has a creative gift with which we can step into the fissures, which we can step into these openings and make a contribution. The contribution doesn't have to be in what people say, oh, that's significant. The contribution can be as me as teacher, doing something with my students where they can open up to their imagination, where they are invited to be different, where they can do something that may appear nonsensical, or that write a poem that appears nonsensical, where there's that space for them to explore. And each one of us has the gift and has a gift or multiple gifts. And really paying attention to those gifts is what enables us. And we each have a contribution to make. So the fallacious self, is this notion, the notion of the modern self, the notion of the self being, secluded from the interactions with the world, and which is really, that's what's creating a lot of the suffering. When we talk about psychological suffering or severe psychological suffering, a lot of it is socially created, right? If somebody who is depressed, say, were out more in nature or just listen to the susurrus of the waves on the ocean, there would be a change, or there could be a change, that there's an opening to change. And, with anything I'm saying, I don't mean to make light of any severe psychological suffering, but here are the natural sources that feed the self that we've closed ourselves off from, and that creates pathology. We're living in a pathological universe that lends itself to severe psychological suffering. And a lot of the symptoms that I see, the way I look at them, really are the problems of Western civilization. And going back to the beginning of our conversation, I'm hoping that there are more and more people who look at the pandemic as the opportunity to look at these issues, whether they're issues of psychopathology, whether they're issues of inequality, whether they're issues of white supremacy, what have you, in a new light, and, are willing to step into these fissures. Now, I'm reminded of of an old story, Hawaiian story that I've been told recently, where which is an initiatory story, but where people are saved. They're going through a dark tunnel, and at the end they're confronted with death, basically, and they need to make a choice. And I think the question is really, do we have the courage to face our issues? Do we have the heart, the courage to go into these spaces with whatever it is that we bring into the world, whether as nurse, whether as teacher, whatever it is, do we have the courage? Do we have that commitment? And the challenge is that when we have that commitment, people will tell us that we are crazy very often, right? Because it's outside of the monad of that individual husk that the individual supposedly is, right? Because we're stepping into these other realms, and that looks crazy from the perspective of modernity. But it's really, when shamans, in Siberia, when they're initiated, they go through what's called shamanic illness. By all appearances, it looks like they're going through a psychotic process. But really what they're going through is they're going through a profound encounter with a larger world, with spirits, with larger than human beings, and come out on a different level of integration, where they can go into these realms for the benefit of others. And we need to have the courage to go there. And again, we all can do it. We all can do it. That's how we are built. That's how we're meant to be. And we've unlearned it. We've dissociated from it. And when we connect with it, there's a richness and there is a satisfaction and an equilibrium that comes from that, from stepping into these spaces. So I'll stop there.
Yeah.
You want me to add to that, David?
If you want to. If not, I have another question.
Okay, another question. Okay.
This is coming from somebody in the audience who wanted to ask. And thank you, Jürgen, for that. Any thoughts on, and I think you all have been answering this from a holistic standpoint, but any thoughts on how to bring healing to a community torn apart by racial uproar, as in the George Floyd case? And And that's a big question to be asking with a few minutes to go here.
Yeah. Maybe I'll say this, that the therapeutic has never not been political. I'm using double negatives there, but maybe that's partly deliberate. The therapeutic is political, is theological, is gastronomical, is bacterial. It's rhizomatic. It's not just the one thing, right? In my experience in grappling or wrestling with questions of emancipation and healing, especially for people who look like me, some things keep coming up, and it's the warnings of that might be derived from a Yoruba cosmology, that the obstacle is part of the way. Or if you want to find your way, you must become lost, which is a proverb from the Yoruba people. If you need to find your way, you must become generously lost. Um, and I think that is really, really important to, it's theoretically significant in these times, because I've been posing the question along with others, echoing the Martin Luther Kingian question of where does Blackness go? And it seems the more a particular framework of emancipation that is premised on representationalism, that is premised on getting a seat at the table, that is premised on a notion of justice that is derived from the workings of the nation state, the more that we depend on those frameworks, the more our bodies keep on getting trashed under the boots of colonial order. Which is the reason why I feel that, and this is not an either or, this is not a dismantling or a dismissing of the needs, the need to pay our bills, the need to seek justice right now, to hold the neck of the powers that be and say, you took the life of one of us, and you need to pay us for that. You need to be accountable for that. But I feel that the anthropological machine in itself will keep on producing and excluding bodies that have been racialized. The racialized assemblage cannot help itself. It's not a thing about bad people doing bad things. It's about a force field that eats up the energy in the field that produces these conflagrations, these oppositional politics that says you against you. And the only way that I can remedy the situation is to offer you justice. But justice is inclusionary by definition. It brings us back in. But I don't want that. I don't want to be included. I don't want to have a front row seat, on the Titanic. I don't want an equal piece of a carcinogenic pie. you know, I I want out. I want out of the whole algorithm. So yes, I think there are two ways I would respond to that question. Yoruba elders say that to answer with wisdom is to speak from the side of one's mouth. So I'm going to be speaking from way, into the side of my mouth, and speak with some level of duplicity when I say that. At some level, yes, we can do all we can in the present context to seek justice, to help suffering bodies to feel more welcome, to listen more, to gather around that. But on another level, we need to create and we need to experiment. We need to go beyond critique, because in a more than human world requires more than critique. Therefore, what it means to be well, what it means to enact healing, is something that is not yet defined. This is something that calls for us to travel. This is something that calls for us to build a wild coalition of rituals and asking and researching and inquiry with place. I think, like some of my elders have been saying, that maybe eating well might just be a perfect, or not a perfect, but an appropriate response to racial trauma. Eating well, learning to eat well. Maybe the favelas in Brazil have a way of dealing with this that has nothing to do with the nation state, by picking up trash, which is abject and impoverished and dirty, and turning that into soap, a ritual that I've seen happen in the favela. It might not be a direct response to the question of healing, But I feel that that indirect route, that way of getting lost, is where we need to go today. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you. I really, we're past time here, and I could talk with you both all day. I appreciate the time and the conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you both so much. Looking forward to having you this summer for the Lowcountry Mental Health Conference. Please be safe and well from where you both are. And to all of you in the audience, thank you for being a part of this. We will be sending you information about both Bayo and Jürgen in terms of things that they are involved in, so that you can get more information about them. We will also be sending you a survey so that you can receive your continuing education credits, and that'll probably happen early next week. And then we will have our final Speaker Spotlight series. I believe it's in June. I'm spacing on it at this point, but we will be in touch. Thank you again, and have a great day.
Thank you, David.
The Lowcountry Mental Health Conference is a fundraising event. The money that we raise for you attending the conference goes directly to clinical care here in the Charleston metro area to address mental health issues.
The setting here is just so amazing and huge, and when you go into the theater, it just feels like a really a big deal.
What differentiates this conference from many others is the quality of the speakers that we have, world-renowned mental health professionals, but also getting unique perspectives from artists, philosophers, again, world-renowned across the globe.
The best experience for me at the conference was probably going in the exhibit hall, where there were, I think, 75 different sponsors and exhibitors that I could network with.
The musical performances were excellent. I had the opportunity to see Edwin McCain pretty close up, and it just moved me to tears. He really connected with the audience. He's a supporter of mental health and shared personal stories, as well as, we all got a break and got to listen to some fabulous music.
I think this conference surprises a lot of people who attend. It's innovative. They're incredible speakers, and we have all of them combined in 2 days. These are folks that people have read or studied in graduate school.
You should not miss this conference. The quality of the speakers, the venue, the location, it's an excellent experience, one not to be missed.
This conference is a great opportunity to see so many different speakers, be in a great city, great location. You gotta come.
I would definitely come again to this conference. It was fabulous. I'll be here every year.
I absolutely would come again, on my calendar right now.
I would really come again. This is my 4th conference. It gets better every year here in Charleston.
I encourage you not to miss this conference if you're a mental health professional. It is truly a gem here on the East Coast that happens every year here in beautiful Charleston, South Carolina. It'll be transformative in terms of your clinical practice and the skills that you'll learn from some of the very best professionals and experts in the field today.